Something big just happened. Out of nowhere, Marjorie Taylor Greene made a sudden move that instantly flipped the conversation in Washington. Before anyone could absorb it, she paired it with a message aimed directly at Trump. No warning, no slow build-up, just a clean break and a very public shock. But here's the thing. While that political firestorm was erupting, Minnesota was hit with a completely different kind of explosion. A sprawling fraud scheme that investigators say reached into state programs, exploited vulnerable families, siphoned off millions, and even funneled money overseas. The timing of these two stories couldn't be more intense. They broke almost back to back, and together they reveal a moment where trust, loyalty, and accountability are being tested all at once. So let's break down exactly what happened, because the deeper you look, the more this all starts to make sense. Most people have recently seen Marjorie Taylor Greene's video message. The tone was personal, raw even. She spoke about dignity, about her family, about her district. She framed Washington as a machine that chews up people who actually care about everyday Americans. She said she had always represented the common man and woman, and that's exactly why she never fit in there. According to her, both political parties use voters election after election, convincing them to hate the other side more, but nothing ever really gets better. The debt climbs, corporations stay comfortable, and average people keep struggling. But then she said something that caught everyone's attention. She announced she was resigning from Congress. Not retiring, resigning. And her last day would be early January of the following year. Now, if you're thinking, what's the difference? That's exactly the right question. Because this decision wasn't just about her. It was a move that immediately affected the balance of power in the House of Representatives. You see, when someone retires, their seat stays filled until their term officially ends. That means leadership can plan around it, keep their numbers steady, work with what they have. But when someone resigns, that seat goes empty right away. And in a House where Republicans have only a razor-thin majority, sometimes just a handful of votes separating them from losing control, every single seat matters. Marjorie knew that. She absolutely knew that. And she chose resignation anyway. So why would she do that? Well, if you listen to her words, she made it clear she wasn't going to stick around and endure what she called a hurtful and hateful primary backed by the very president she once championed. She said she had too much self-respect, loved her family too much, and didn't want to put her district through that kind of fight. She used a striking phrase. She said she refused to be a battered wife, hoping it all goes away and gets better. That's not the kind of language you use unless something has fundamentally broken. And it didn't take long for Trump to respond. He posted on Truth Social that Marjorie was leaving because her poll numbers were tanking and she didn't want to face a primary challenger with his endorsement. He said she'd have no chance of winning. He also went after her relationship with Congressman Thomas Massie, calling him one of the worst Republicans in decades, someone who votes against the party and good legislation. Trump said that for some reason, Marjorie's alliance with Massie didn't help her. He added that he stopped returning her endless phone calls, and that's when, in his words, Marjorie went bad. But then, he softened just a bit at the end. He said he would always appreciate her and thank her for her service to the country. It was a strange mix, harsh criticism, followed by a brief olive branch. That kind of response tells you something. It tells you this wasn't just a policy disagreement. This was personal, and it had been building for a while. Other voices weighed in quickly. Representative Tim Burchett, who's known for speaking his mind, said he's seen this kind of thing before in politics. People have big disagreements, and sometimes they make up, but he didn't think Trump and Green would. He pointed out that Marjorie has been independent since she arrived in Congress, and right now, she and Trump are in complete disagreement. When asked what it was really about, Burchett was direct. He said, it's a personality clash that's been a long time coming. He said she's upset about what she sees as Trump's embrace of Israel, and she's upset about several other things too. But at the end of the day, she's independent, she has to stand for herself, and voters will decide if they still want her. Now, this is where things get layered. Because Marjorie Taylor Greene was once one of Trump's most vocal supporters. She defended him constantly, showed up at his events, echoed his rhetoric, and positioned herself as part of his inner circle. So what changed? From the outside looking in, this kind of fracture usually means competing priorities, not just disagreements over bills or votes. And when you start digging into the specific issues that drove them apart, two big topics rise to the surface: Israel and the Epstein files. Marjorie began shifting her tone on Israel. She started questioning the level of U.S. support, the financial commitments, the strategic priorities. That put her at odds with Trump, who has been one of Israel's most consistent allies. And then there's the Epstein files, a subject that divides people intensely. Some want full transparency, others think it's politically dangerous, and still others see it as a distraction. Marjorie made it clear she believed in releasing everything. Trump, for reasons he stated and reasons people speculate about, has not been as eager to go down that road. These aren't small disagreements. These are ideological collisions. And when you combine that with what Burchett said about personality differences and what Trump said about her allying with Massey, someone Trump clearly doesn't respect, you start to see a picture of two people who are aligned by circumstances but never really aligned in worldview. And here's what makes this moment even more significant. Marjorie felt secure enough to do this. She wasn't afraid of the backlash. She knew it would shrink the GOP's majority. She knew it would frustrate Mike Johnson, the Speaker, who's already dealing with a caucus that's harder to control than ever. And she did it anyway. That tells you something about the current state of the Republican Party. There are factions now. There are people willing to break away, even from Trump, even at a cost. But understanding what happened is only the start. The real question is why now? And to answer that, you have to zoom out and look at what else was happening right around the same time. Because while Washington was fixated on this political drama, a completely different kind of bomb was going off in Minnesota, and this one involved fraud on a scale that's hard to wrap your head around. It started with a program called Housing Stabilization Services. It's part of Minnesota's Medicaid system, and it was designed to help seniors, people struggling with addiction, and others find stable housing. The idea was solid, catch people before they fall through the cracks, give them support, help them stay housed. But the criteria to qualify for this program, they were loose, really loose. And when systems are built with loose criteria and not enough oversight, they become targets. And that's exactly what happened. Just a few years ago, this program cost the state around $2 to $3 million a year. By last year, that number had exploded to over $100 million, and projections for this year, even higher. We're talking about a more than 40-fold increase in just a handful of years. That's not normal growth. That's not a program expanding to meet genuine need. That's a red flag the size of a billboard. Investigators started looking into it, and what they found was a coordinated effort. People were submitting claims for services that were either wildly exaggerated or never provided at all. Families were being recruited, told what to say, told how to navigate the system, and the money, it wasn't staying in Minnesota. Several individuals, many of them members of the Somali community, were charged with defrauding the system. Now, before anyone jumps to conclusions, this isn't about an entire community. This is about specific people who exploited a program that was supposed to help the most vulnerable. And when fraud like this happens, it doesn't just hurt taxpayers, it hurts the people who genuinely need help and can't get it because resources are being drained. But this wasn't even the largest discovery, because investigators found something far more alarming when they started looking at another program, one that was supposed to help children with autism. Minnesota, like a lot of states, funds autism therapy through Medicaid. It's expensive, and it's necessary. Families with kids on the spectrum rely on these services. The program had been running for years without major issues, but then, suddenly, the costs started skyrocketing. We're talking about going from around $3 million a year to somewhere in the ballpark of $400 million in just a few years. How does that happen? Well, investigators say it happened through a scheme that was as calculated as it was cruel. People were recruited again, often within specific community networks, to bring families in and convince them to get their children diagnosed with autism, whether the kids actually had it or not. In some cases, families didn't even know what they were signing up for. In other cases, they did, and they were told they'd get a cut of the money. Service providers started popping up everywhere. The number of registered autism therapy providers jumped from around 40 to well over 300 in just a few years. And these providers, many of them were competing for clients, literally bidding with the size of checks they could offer families. It didn't matter if the child needed therapy. It didn't matter if therapy was even being provided. The claims were submitted, the money flowed, and the system already stretched thin couldn't keep up. This is the kind of fraud that makes you angry, right? Because it's not just about money, it's about exploiting children. It's about taking resources that were meant to help kids with real challenges and turning them into a payday. And when you think about the families who actually need those services and might not be able to access them now because the system is overwhelmed or underfunded due to this kind of abuse, it's infuriating. But the story doesn't stop there, because Investigators kept digging, and they started following the money. And that's when this whole thing took a much darker turn. A significant portion of the money that was defrauded from these programs didn't stay in the United States. It was wired overseas. Specifically, a lot of it ended up in Somalia. Now, remittances sending money back home to family are common and completely legal. Immigrant communities do this all over the world. But what investigators found wasn't just people supporting relatives. They found patterns. Large sums moving through informal money transfer networks, repeated transactions that didn't match up with normal family support, and then they found something even more concerning. According to reports that came out, some of this money ended up in the hands of Al-Shabaab, a terror group with ties to Al-Qaeda that operates primarily in Somalia. Now, to be clear, it's hard to trace every dollar once it leaves the country, especially when it's moving through informal channels. But investigators say the links are there, and they're credible enough that federal authorities are treating this as more than just welfare fraud. This is being looked at as a potential national security issue. Think about that for a second. Taxpayer money meant to help seniors find housing and children get therapy, potentially ending up in the hands of a terrorist organization. That's not just a failure of oversight. That's a catastrophic breakdown in how we protect public resources. And it raises questions that go way beyond Minnesota. How many other states have programs with similar vulnerabilities? How many other communities are being exploited in the same way? And how do we fix systems that were designed with good intentions but are now being weaponized by people who see them as opportunities? So you have this massive fraud scheme unraveling in real time, with arrests being made, indictments being handed down, and the scope of it still being uncovered. And right in the middle of all this, Trump weighed in. He posted on Truth Social, this was just recently, and he didn't hold back. He said Minnesota, under Governor Tim Walz, has become a hub of fraudulent money laundering activity. He said Somali gangs are terrorizing people in the state, and billions of dollars are missing. And then he announced something that sent shockwaves through both political and immigrant communities. He said, as president, he was immediately terminating the temporary protected status program for Somali nationals in Minnesota. And he ended the post with, send them back to where they came from. It's over. Now, temporary protected status, TPS, is a program that allows people from certain countries to stay in the U.S. if their home country is considered unsafe due to war, natural disaster, or other crises. Somalia has been on that list for years because of ongoing conflict and instability. TPS doesn't give people a path to citizenship, but it does protect them from deportation and allows them to work legally. Ending TPS for a specific group in a specific state, that's unusual. And whether Trump actually has the legal authority to do that unilaterally is a question that's already being debated. But the announcement itself was a signal. It was Trump saying, this has gone too far, and I'm stepping in. The reactions were immediate and split. Some people applauded it. They said it's about time someone took a hard stance on fraud and held people accountable, especially when there are potential national security risks involved. Others were outraged. They said it was an overreach, that it punished an entire community for the actions of a relative few, and that it ignored the fact that many Somali Americans are citizens who have been here for years, contributing to their communities and raising families. One of the most prominent voices to push back was Ilhan Omar, the congresswoman who represents a district in Minnesota with a large Somali population. She responded on social media almost immediately after Trump's announcement. She said, I'm a citizen, and so are the majority of Somali in America. Good luck celebrating a policy change that really doesn't have much impact on the Somali you love to hate. We are here to stay. Now, that statement reveals something deeper than just a political rebuttal. It taps into a long-running tension in this country about immigration, assimilation, identity, and belonging. Omar is a naturalized citizen. She came to the U.S. as a refugee when she was young, and she's now an elected member of Congress. For her, this isn't abstract, it's personal. And her response was essentially saying, you can't erase us. We're part of this country now, whether you like it or not. But here's where it gets complicated. Because while Omar and others are right that many Somali Americans are citizens and have every right to be here, that doesn't erase the very real problem of organized fraud that investigators have documented. And this is where the conversation often breaks down. One side says, you're scapegoating an entire community. The other side says, you're ignoring a massive problem because you're afraid of being called racist. And in the middle, you have taxpayers, people like you and me, wondering why systems that are supposed to help people are being exploited, and why it seems so hard to hold anyone accountable without the whole thing turning into a culture war. And the truth is, both things can be true at the same time. It's possible to acknowledge that most Somali Americans are law-abiding people who are just trying to build better lives, while also acknowledging that specific fraud rings, yes, many of them operating within Somali networks, have caused enormous damage. The question isn't about demonizing a community. The question is, how do we protect public resources, enforce the law fairly, and make sure programs actually serve the people they're designed to help? And while political leaders were arguing about identity and authority and who gets to stay and who has to go, investigators kept digging. And they found something even stranger, something that showed just how brazen and organized this whole operation had become. There's another fraud case that's been making its way through the courts in Minnesota, and it's tied to a program called Feeding Our Future. This one is staggering in its scope. We're talking about a scheme that investigators say involved fraudulently claiming to serve hundreds of thousands of meals to children during the pandemic, meals that were never actually provided, and stealing somewhere in the range of $300 million in federal funds. Let me say that again. $300 million meant to feed hungry kids. One of the people charged in this case is a man who ran a small grocery store in North Minneapolis. According to the indictment, he claimed to have served over 300,000 meals to children out of his tiny store. Investigators say the store had already been disqualified from a federal nutrition program because of suspected fraud. But somehow, he was still able to access Feeding Our Future funds. He allegedly used over $200,000 of that money to buy the building where his store is located. When reporters asked him about it, he said, "If I own this building, and I want to be here for the next 20 or 30 years, nobody can kick me out. It's mine." Well, as it turns out, the federal government has a different view on property purchased with stolen money. The indictment says the building is subject to forfeiture, meaning the feds can take it back to recoup some of the stolen funds. But a lot of the money is already gone. There were wire transfers to Hong Kong, payments to employees of Feeding Our Future who were allegedly bribed to look the other way, credit card bills paid off. Once money starts moving like that, especially overseas, it's almost impossible to get it back. And here's where the story takes an even darker turn. Because some of the people charged in the Feeding Our Future case didn't just commit fraud, they tried to obstruct justice. Federal prosecutors indicted several individuals for attempting to bribe a juror during the trial. We're talking about jury tampering at a level that sounds like something out of a crime movie. According to court documents, the group targeted a specific juror, juror number 52, because she was the youngest on the jury and appeared to be the only juror of color. They dug up information about her family online. They tracked her movements. They even put a GPS device on her car so they could monitor where she was going. And then, one night, someone left a bag at her home. Inside that bag was $120,000 in cash, with a clear message, "Vote not guilty, and this money is yours." Fortunately, the juror did the right thing. She came forward immediately and reported the bribe. The trial continued, and in the end, several of the defendants were convicted. But think about what almost happened. Think about how close this came to completely derailing a case involving hundreds of millions of dollars in stolen funds meant for children. And think about what it says about the people behind the scheme, that they were willing to track a juror, threaten her implicitly, and try to buy their way out of accountability. One of the people charged in the bribery plot ended up fleeing the country. Reports say that person went back to Somalia before the first wave of indictments even came down. Out of the 77 people charged in the overall Feeding Our Future case, more than 50 have been convicted so far. But some of them are gone. They're out of reach. And the money? A lot of it is gone too. Now, after all of this started coming to light, the Minneapolis police chief held a press conference, and what he said was telling. He stood there with a translator, someone who could speak to the Somali community in their own language, and he essentially apologized. He said the Somali community had been welcoming to him, and that they'd been working together to address serious problems. He said they needed to be honest about the issues they were facing. But then he added this: "If people have taken anything that I've said out of context in a way that's caused harm, I apologize, and I'm sorry for that, because that's not my intention at all." Think about that for a moment. Here's a police chief, in the middle of one of the largest fraud investigations his city has ever seen, apologizing for potentially offending people. Now, I get it, he's trying to maintain community relations. He's trying to make sure people don't feel targeted or scapegoated. But there's something deeply frustrating about watching a public official apologize for enforcing the law. Because the message it sends is, we're more afraid of being called insensitive than we are committed to holding people accountable. And That's part of the problem. When systems are exploited on this scale, and when the response is to walk on eggshells because we're worried about how it looks or who might be offended, we end up in a place where accountability becomes almost impossible. And the people who suffer the most, it's not the fraudsters, they've already got their money. It's the people who actually need help. The seniors who can't get housing support because the program's overwhelmed. The kids with autism who can't access therapy because resources have been drained. The families who were counting on meal programs that turned out to be fronts for theft. So when you look at all of these stories together, Washington drama, Minnesota scandals, national security concerns, they reveal a pattern worth paying attention to. And that pattern is this. Trust is breaking down. Trust in political leaders who promise to fight for you but end up fighting with each other. Trust in systems that are supposed to protect the vulnerable but instead become pipelines for exploitation. Trust in institutions that are supposed to enforce the law but seem more worried about optics than outcomes. Marjorie Taylor Greene's resignation and her very public break with Trump, that's a symptom of a party that's fracturing under the weight of competing visions and personality clashes. Whether you agree with her or not, whether you think she's principled or just calculating, the fact is that someone who was once in the inner circle felt secure enough to walk away and burn bridges on the way out. That tells you the old rules don't apply anymore. Loyalty isn't guaranteed. Alliances are fragile. And people are willing to take risks because they believe the voters are more frustrated with the establishment than they are loyal to any one leader. Meanwhile, in Minnesota, you have fraud on a scale that's hard to comprehend. Systems designed with good intentions, built to help people who are struggling, turned into mechanisms for theft. And not just theft, potential funding of terrorist networks overseas. That's not a minor oversight. That's a catastrophic failure of governance. It's a failure to build systems with proper safeguards. It's a failure to enforce accountability when red flags appear. And it's a failure to prioritize the people who actually need help over the fear of being accused of bias or insensitivity. And here's what ties it all together. Both of these stories are about accountability. In Washington, it's about whether leaders are accountable to the people who elected them or just to their own ambitions and grudges. In Minnesota, it's about whether systems are accountable to taxpayers and the vulnerable populations they're supposed to serve, or whether they're just opportunities for exploitation. And the frustration you might be feeling right now if you're watching this and thinking, how did we get here? How did things get this broken? That's a frustration a lot of people share. It's not about left or right. It's not about red or blue. It's about the basic expectation that the people we put in power and the systems we fund with our tax dollars should actually work for us, not against us. Trump's decision to terminate temporary protected status for Somali nationals in Minnesota is controversial, no question. Some will say it's a justified response to a real problem. Others will say it's an overreach that punishes people who had nothing to do with the fraud. And honestly, both perspectives have merit. But what's not debatable is that something had to give. When you have fraud schemes this large, this organized, and this damaging, doing nothing is not an option. The question is whether the response is fair, whether it's effective, and whether it actually addresses the root problems or whether it just creates new ones. So here's where it all comes together. Marjorie Taylor Greene walked away from Congress, and in doing so, she made it harder for Republicans to govern with their slim majority. She cited principle, dignity, and frustration with a system that doesn't serve ordinary people. Whether that's the whole truth or just part of it, time will tell. But her departure is a signal that the coalition Trump built is not as solid as it once seemed. There are cracks, there are factions, and people are making moves based on what they think is coming next, not just what's happening now. In Minnesota, investigators have uncovered fraud that spans multiple programs, involves millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars, and potentially funnels money to dangerous groups overseas. The response from leadership has been mixed, the community is divided, and the systems that were supposed to prevent this kind of abuse failed completely. And in the middle of all of it, regular people are left wondering who's actually looking out for us. This isn't about personalities, it's not about parties, it's about trust. And right now, trust is in short supply. But here's the thing, stories like this, as frustrating and complicated as they are, matter. They matter because they force us to pay attention. They matter because they reveal what's broken. And they matter because if enough people demand better, if enough people refuse to accept systems that don't work and leaders who don't lead, things can change. It won't be fast. It won't be easy. But it starts with being informed, asking hard questions, and not letting anyone on any side tell you that the problems aren't real or that accountability doesn't matter. And I'd really like to hear what you think about all this. Do you believe Marjorie Taylor Greene's resignation was a principled decision or a strategic move? And when it comes to Minnesota, do you think Trump's response was justified or too far? If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Your insights help shape these conversations, and they genuinely make a difference, especially on stories as impactful as Marjorie Taylor Greene dropping a bomb on her way out and the shocking fraud scheme shaking Minnesota. Because at the end of the day, we're all in this together. And the only way we make sense of these moments, the only way we push for something better, is by staying engaged, staying informed, and refusing to look away when things get complicated. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.